Hello everyone and welcome to the Series 1 wrap-up video for All Your Basics. Today I'm going to look back at the 6 decks that we built and played during the series, give some advice on where to take them from here with eye to cards that have come out since, cards that you might acquire as your collection expands, and potentially what's coming up in the new expansion, Denizens of Shimzar, which is out in a couple of weeks. And I'm also going to look at some of my own decks and apply the same sort of lens to them that we did to the decks from All Your Basics. So talk about the core idea that drove me building them, what the overall strategy is, why I made the card choices I made. So there are going to be no new decks in here, but the idea is to just go over and firm up the overall principles that I've been getting at over the course of the series, and maybe show off some stuff that's built with less of a budget mindset. My collection is not enormous, but I have, by this point, have a fair bit more stuff than you can reasonably use in a budget video. So let's jump in. I've conveniently ordered the decks by their appearance in the series, with my own at the bottom, but that probably won't last very long because it moves them around when you save or cancel. So we started off with the Kara deck. This is a mid-range deck based on getting large bodies with normally opening gambit abilities down on the board. So we start off with these minions like Ephemeral Shroud, Bloodtear Alchemist, Primus Fist, Maw, who are basically little spells on equally little bodies. And they're cheap, and that's fine. And then you use Kara's Bloodborne spell, Kinetic Surge, to make them all massive threats. So now your Ephemeral Shrouds are 3/3s, 4/4s, 5/5s, and your opponent has to genuinely dedicate resources to killing them. And you just have an infinite supply of these things because you're, drawing a new large threat every turn with an ability that further affects the board. So because Kara's Bloodborne spell is so focused on minions, we have very few spells in this deck. We have a grand total of 7, 3 of which draw us more minions. Cryogenesis. And the spells are sort of a necessary evil. They're essentially cards that deal with things that the rest of the deck can't. We have a fairly low curve because we can get away with running a lot of 2-mana creatures because we can just make them bigger later on, make them into more respectable threats. And it's kind of nice being able to go, on turn 5 or 6, just deploy 3 4/5s and watch your opponent struggle to deal with that. At the top end, we have stuff like Ash Mephit, which is 3 4/5s by itself if it was in your hand early enough. The ever-lovely Arctic Displacer, which is 10 or more power wherever you need it. And stuff like Dancing Blades, which is just this big mid-range minion that removes something and is large in itself, generates a lot of value. So playing this deck, we look to establish board dominance through using our opening gambits to effect, as well as having a series of large minions that the opponent can't easily deal with, even if they have a good amount of removal or large minions of their own. Eventually they'll just overwhelm their resources. So quite a few people have asked me how to improve this one going forward, and I've heard good things about its performance on the ladder. I have been playing it a little bit myself, because it's less outdated than my other Vanor deck, which is basically the same thing but older. So you can put more or less anything in a Kara deck, provided it's decently aggressively costed. I think a lot of the cards in this list are still very popular in the high tier versions. The main thing that we're running substitute versions of is the card draw spells. So we have Blazehound and Sojourner. Spelljammer is a lot more popular than Sojourner right now because she's less vulnerable to Zenrui, who is the awful legendary that can steal a minion of power 2 or less. Spelljammer only requires 1 Kinetic Surge activation to get out of range, and still works even if they Zenrui it. So all they steal is the body. If you play a Sojourner and they steal it, not only have they stolen your minion, they've stolen your card draw machine, and they're going to draw more cards off it. Frostbone Naga is now pretty much outdated thanks to the printing of the much better Blistering Scorn. So Spelljammer is legendary, it's kind of hard to get hold of, but Blistering Scorns are common, so you should be able to craft those quite easily. Blistering Scorn is very good. It's a 3/4 for 3 that deals 1 damage to everything as an opening gambit, including itself. So it's a 3/3 really. And of course, obviously with Kara's ability, that can become 4/4, 5/5, and so on. And this card cleans up swarms of things like Wraithlings or Jack's True Sight, which fills the board with 1/1s with ranged, which Vanar very much struggle against normally. And it does it in a way that Frostbone Naga just can't because it has an unlimited range. It's also cheaper, it's only a 3-drop. Other things? I mean, I'm generally pretty happy with this list, and it's performed well for me when I've played it myself. Possibly these 4-drops could be replaced with something more exciting, although I don't know what that is. The Hailstone Golem could easily be a Dioltas, or you could just cut it and go for more stuff further down the curve. Repulsor Beast, I think, doesn't see a whole lot of play, although the card is quite good and it's nice to have as an option. It's entirely possible that you just want another... Maybe you want a Lightbender or something instead, because a lot of the things you want to kill with Repulsor Beast are also vulnerable to either Lightbender or Sunset Paragon, which is another common one. Sunset Paragon is the unicorn. This thing. It's basically an area of effect spell similar to Frostbone Naga, but it can kill much larger minions. It is also symmetrical, but it doesn't hurt Kara, so you can just put it next to your general and blow up things like 8/8s for free. Zenri is quite popular, as you might expect. It doesn't like how I'm spelling Zenri. There he is. I don't know why it doesn't accept the apostrophe. Anyway, this is the terrifying Zenri. It's quite popular in Kara decks because its ability is extremely swingy. And it's good against stuff like Lantern Fox, which is otherwise an annoyance. But generally, Kara's Bloodborne spell is quite easy to build with. You just put in creatures with decent abilities. Things like Hailstone Golem and Arctic Displacer are a bit less powerful with it because most of their mana cost goes into the body. They're already big, whereas things like Saberspine Tiger, Primus Fist, Maw, these cards are understated because of their abilities. Or in the case of Primus Fist, just like average but small. And making them into big threats is more impactful than increasing the size of an already large on-curve minion. That said, making big things bigger is a good way to win games of Duelist or any other CCG. So, yeah, there's very little in this deck that is just bad, and it should serve you well if you want to keep playing with it. Just feel free to tinker and throw stuff in. Like the main thing I would definitely recommend is getting Spelljammers if you can, and more card draw in general, more Sojourners. Ulquiorn, Sworn Sister Ulquiorn is another good option. She is 4 mana, but you get the card draw immediately. Ulquiorn is unlocked by getting 6 neutral rares in sets of 3 each. So 3 of one, 3 of the second, 3 of the third, etc. Which can take a while, but once you've got her, she can be thrown into basically any deck that needs to draw cards and does a really good job of it. So the second deck we built was Arjun and his Golems. So this is actually quite a surprisingly effective deck. Again, I don't think I've played it on ladder since, but I was very impressed with it in testing. And I've played it in a few friendly games where it's been very good. So the low end of this is basically the same as a typical Lionor deck. We have Azurite Lions, we have Windblade Adepts, we have a couple of Divine Bonds, which aren't really low end, but they're cheap. So we have some Ephemeral Shrouds because Dispel is useful. We have Golem Metallurgist, which is obviously a less normal choice, but it's because our top end is entirely Golems. So in terms of things to change in this deck, outside of the usual caveat of Sojourner being vulnerable to Zenri, and maybe you want Ulquiorn instead or something, there's not really much that you would genuinely want to get rid of. I guess Tempest is probably cuttable now that, again, Blistering Scorn exists, which is, in a majority of situations, basically the same thing. Although I have won several Lionor matches by using Tempest as deal 2 to their face. But outside of that, it's basically the same thing, but you get a 3/3 with it. And as we saw in the Magmar episode, I think it was, Blistering Scorn itself is just a really powerful card. In the game, I played a 2-drop. My opponent played two 2-drops in the middle. And I played Blistering Scorn and traded my 2-drop for their 2 and a general hit. So I just played a 3/3 and got a sick 2-for-1 on turn 2. And it was absolutely bananas. Can't really do that with Tempest. The card's fine, but you don't get the 3/3 body. So Blistering Scorn is a good pick. These Sun-type Maidens, they're fine. They've been pretty good. You could easily replace those with something else like Dioltas. Actually, Dioltas is probably a good one because Dioltas is a 5/3. When it dies, it spawns a 0/10 with Provoke near your general. The thing is that the 0/10 can still move and attack, so you can put Arjun's Bloodborne spell on it, or, of course, Divine Bond, trollololol, take 10 or 12, now you die. Dioltas is a mainstay in Lionheart X and is a pretty decent replacement for this. But beyond that, all we're really doing is tweaking some of the interactive cards. You can probably get rid of these Sunstone Bracers. Maybe you don't even need Blood Tier Alchemists if you run a bunch of Scorns. So you could cut Bracers, probably both the Alchemists and Tempest and say the Sojourners and the Suntides. Put in Dioltas. Why don't just do this? We can do these. We put in 3 Scorn. A couple of Dioltas. And Lucian. So this raises the curve a bit. We've still got a slot left, actually. Should probably be a Holy Immolation or something. This card is just really good. It's not mandatory for our deck in particular, but it's so powerful that it doesn't matter that much. Get in there. Maybe cut one of the Dioltases for another one, actually. Because this card is just really strong. It goes boom, essentially. Yeah, so this version of the deck has a slightly higher curve, but just has, these more powerful minions with nice synergistic effects that supplement the strategy of beating face with golems pretty well. So Scorn helps you kill swarms and fights for board dominance. Dioltas is good value and will scare your opponents, and it trades really well because of its 5 power. Immolation goes boom. This card is terrifying. If you've ever played against it, you'll know it. It kills their stuff, deals 4 to their face, heals your minion as well. It's really good with Azeroth Lion for multiple reasons. Azeroth Lion's celerity means that it can move twice to get into position for Holy Immolation, or it can move and attack, be healed by Holy Immolation, and then either sit there or attack again, or move away. And it's a 2-drop, so you can play it and Holy Immolation for 6 mana when you have nothing else on board. So this card, it's not that synergistic. We're not profiting off the heal or anything, but we don't need to. It's just really good. What's next? So in week 3 we did Arcanist Vitruvian. So I'm still playing with this deck. I really like it. In fact, I had a Vitruvian quest today and I was playing this. I haven't modified it at all, although I probably should. I'm not sure what I'd put in. This isn't really the sort of deck for adding Blistering Scorn, which was printed after this was made, because we have Prismatic Illusionist, which is a nice little nombo. We also have Jaxes, so we don't really want to kill our own stuff, because we'd have to rely on Inner Oasis to be able to use our Scorn effectively. Maybe it's worth it because sometimes your 1 toughness minions will have been buffed. But anyway, this is a mid-range combo deck featuring Arcanists, most notably this one, the Elby Sage, and the Prismatic Illusionist, which respectively buff the toughness of Arcanists and produce more Arcanists. A whole ton of spells, and then some supplementing dorks, like this Jaxi, this Rust Crawler, Starfire Scarab, it's got a nice balance of removal, pump spells, which are good for tempo and protecting your minions. Sion's First Wish, which is both a pump spell and draw. The ever valuable Siphon Energy. I had a game earlier where I think I would have won pretty handily if I'd drawn a Siphon Energy early on. But I very sadly didn't. Possibly needs more Blood Tier Alchemists. I'm not sure what I'd cut for them. I lost the game earlier to an opponent putting Deathstrike Seal on a Heartseeker, and I just didn't draw an answer to it. And I couldn't play anything for several turns. Because my hand was just like Albeast Sage and pump spells, which obviously just instantly die, so they don't even achieve anything. I mean, I don't know how common that strategy is, and you can deal with it with Siphon Energy, so maybe it doesn't matter so much. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. I mean, maybe you could put Spelljammers in, but this deck doesn't generally lack for massive cards. Maybe you could put in Blind Scorch and Zenri for the combo. So Blind Scorch is the one here, lowers a minion's attack to 0 until your next turn. And then you can steal it with Zenri. And obviously Blind Scorch is a spell, so it triggers your Arcanists, and also allows you to hit something or prevent it from hitting you, which is a nice little tempo gain. It's reasonably good with Jaxi winning ranged fights or Sunseer farming life gain. But I'm not sure what I'd cut for it. I mean, if you were going to do... I guess you'd cut the Starfire Scarabs and put in 3 of this and 3 Zenri. And maybe cut one of the second wishes. One Entropic Decay? That seems wrong. And a Cosmic Flash or a Bone Swarm? I'm not sure. These cards are all good enough that I'm a little hesitant to cut them even for a very powerful package. Actually, Rasha's Curse is a good inclusion. So this card is a lot stronger than it looks. Basically, it's got a bunch of text that occasionally destroys an artifact and always deals 2 damage to something standing near the opponent's general, which is a reasonable card, really. It's a bit more flexible than Bone Swarm. Like, as long as the Dervish doesn't spawn somewhere stupid, you can use it to do things like kill ranged minions that the opponent played and then moved away from on the first turn. So it's quite good against stuff like Cannon of Mechazor, Pyromancer, that sort of thing. Plus, of course, it kills artifacts, which is occasionally quite useful. We do have Rustcrawler for that. But, you know, maybe you want to play Rasha's Curse instead, I'm not sure. The Dervish dissipates at end of turn, which is sad because you can't get a lot of value out of pumping it. But it can provide a target for a Sion's First Wish if you just really need to draw a card. I have played spell-heavy lists with Pyromancers in the past. I wouldn't recommend it now because of the ubiquity of Blood Tier Alchemist and Blistering Scorn. But it is nice to have this kind of alternate win con where you just drop the Pyromancer, they don't kill it. You put a pump spell on it, you kill their stuff, and you just murder everything they play from there on. But enough people play, you know, Ranged Dispel, Distant Removal, Saber Spine Tiger, Blood Tier Alchemist, Blistering Scorn, and so on, that the card is just really not as good as it could be. Star's Fury actually is probably a good option. This card is a lot of burst, a lot of clear, is a nice big AoE. Would have helped me with my opponent's Deathstrike sealed annoying Heartseeker that one time. Maybe I should put some of these in. If I was going to put in Star's Fury, I would think about cutting Bone Swarm's Second Wish or Entropic Decay. I've actually found Entropic Decay to be better than usual in this deck because your opponent has to respect your minions enough, I think, that they don't block you off that much because they're much more concerned with dealing with Albeast Sages. Or maybe the meta is just such that Entropic Decay is good now, with lots of people being aggressive and playing large minions in your face. mostly Magmar players, but Kara as well, it's alright against. Science Second Wish I found to be a bit underwhelming. It's kind of like the most situational pump spell you play. Cosmic Flesh gives a bit of extra toughness and can be used defensively more easily. Science First Wish is cheap and draws a card. Inner Oasis draws a card and affects lots of things. But the Second Wish, I find those stick in my hand or get replaced the most. So those are probably a decent candidate for cutting, even though you're cutting a 2-drop for a 5-drop. What's next? Smork on the Water. So this was our aggressive Magmar deck where we just get in their face, beat down, attack, 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 and hope they die. This was the first deck to have Blistering Scorn in it because Blistering Scorn was printed before this, just before this came out. So this deck overall has quite a lot in common with the Kara deck. If you look at the early plays, we've got some of the same 2-drops or the same sort of density of early stuff. We have Blaze Hounds for card draw. We have the Blistering Scorn that would totally be in the Kara list. We have the 1 of Repulsor Beast and the 3 Tiger. But here we're doing it for a different reason. We want to spam out stuff early and get on the board and stay on the board as much as we can. We just want to deal damage to the opponent's face. If we let them lock us out, we're going to lose. So the quicker we can get ahead and stay ahead in the very first few turns, the better. For later on, we do have a few nice little options. We have Adamantite Claws, which can push an unholy amount of damage. We obviously have Varth's Bloodborne spell, allowing Varth himself to deal repeated damage. We have a couple of nice little Hail Mary options in Plasma Storm and Earth Sphere. And we have some decent removal in Eggmorph and solid utility minions at the 4 slot as well. So the number one thing about this deck is that it doesn't have the 2 most broken Magma cards in it. It does not have Earthslister Taigete, who is insane. And it does not have Makantor Warbeast, who is insane. So in terms of updating the deck, I would start there. I would cut Veteran Silithar, probably Repulsor Beast, Rust Crawler, I guess. Some of these pump spells, probably got at least 1 Diatide Frenzy, 1 Greater Fortitude, and just chuck in Taigete and Makantor. Taigete is miles better than Veteran Silithar in this deck because she just deals much more damage to the opponent. Could probably afford to cut Plasma Storm as well. It's quite good, but you don't need it as much. Maybe put in a 3rd Scorn. You become more vulnerable to Blood Moon Priestess, but you also gain more ways to deal them damage. So, another really good option that has become a very powerful player in the meta recently, but that I wasn't aware of when I built this deck because it hadn't taken off, was is Blistering Scorn plus Amplification. So the Scorn deals damage to itself when it comes in, which means that the opponent, which means that you can heal it if you're playing Zeraon, or in the case of Magmar, you can amplify it. So a common turn 1 play going second now is move forward, play Blistering Scorn upon the mana tile, and amplify it, and you get a 5/7. It's 2 cards, but you know your opponent then has to deal with a 5/7 immediately. That's pretty scary, and the Blistering Scorn will weaken your opponent's 2-drop, meaning your general can probably kill it next turn if it doesn't suicide itself into the Scorn. It's pretty strong, and if they don't have an immediate specific answer, they die. You know, the amount of damage and tempo you can get off of a 5/7 on turn 1 is absolutely absurd. So if I were building the deck now, I'd probably put I'd go up to 3 Scorns, play some amplifications. Along that line, people usually play Flash Reincarnation as well, which is very good with Taigete because she takes damage and deals 2 to everything around her. And then, of course, you can amplify the result and you get another 5/7. I think you get a 5/7 Taigete. That's a lot of cards, but you know it's hard to remove. It deals a lot of damage to things around her. And if you're playing things like Ulquiorn, who's the sister who puts random cards in your hand, you can reload quite quickly afterwards if your opponent is even still moving after a few turns of getting beaten in the face by oversized minions. I haven't been playing this deck since. The main two decks that I've kept going with are the Vitruvian deck and this next one, the Abyssian deck. And I guess, and to a lesser extent, the Kara deck, because it's just kind of supplanted my existing Kara deck when I have Vanar quests. So speaking of Abyssian, we built this this cool, weird combo deck that I've since been tinkering with and tweaking slightly. You'll see I've already made some changes. I've added a pair of Iraqi headhunters, which were suggested on Reddit. These guys are, I'm not sure how well they're working out, but they've got a lot of potential. So this deck is built around Rite of the Undervault. We want to be able to draw 6 cards, right? We want to spam out a hand and then draw an entire new hand and win with it. To that end, we're playing lots of cheap things. You know, there's only a few cards in this deck that cost more than 3 mana, and we are playing lots of combo-y elements that are much easier to pull together when you're drawing that many cards. So we have a Mechazor pack. We have 12 mechs, and we play 5 of them. We get an 8/8 that your opponent will struggle to remove, which will kill them in a couple of turns. Mechazor specifically it spawns on a square of your choice, and it has ranged, frenzy, airdrop, which means it spawns in wherever you want, and can't be targeted by any spells. It's a very powerful minion. So with these mechs, the biggest challenge in any mech deck is getting to 5 of them and offsetting the fact that they're all a bit small. You know, this is a 2/2 with no text beyond progressing your Mechazor build. That's not good. It just dies to a general hit. The 3-drops, Cannon, which has ranged, and Sword, which has frenzy, are occasionally quite powerful by themselves, especially if you pump them. We're not running pump spells in this deck, but in other factions you would. But they are small, they are fragile, and they often just die. The upside is that, again, when you're just throwing them out and then drawing another 5 or 6 cards, who cares? You know, they're expendable, and you'll much more reliably get to Mechazor. The rest of the deck is, we have a bunch of interaction in Ritual Banishing and Demonic Lure, as well as things like Primus Fist and Void Pulse to get value and answer situations. Void Pulse, surprisingly good card. It's very good against Songhai. You know, just swinging the life race just a little bit. It's so cheap that you can throw it out, you know, after writing and drawing one, for instance, and can be surprisingly impactful. And we're also playing Blood Moon Priestesses, full set, plus a Shadow Dancer and a Soul Shatter Pact, to add in a Death Watch element to the deck. So we're playing all these cheap minions and we're just vomiting them onto the board basically, as well. And we're also running Lilith, whose Bloodborne spell makes 2 Wraithlings. So that means we can quite naturally just generate a mass of bodies, which is great with Blood Moon Priestess. So we can get good value off of her, and if the opponent doesn't immediately answer her, we can basically just go off. Then we can use a Rite or Judicious Replacing to find the Shadow Dancer or the Soul Shatter Pact and just win. This deck is surprisingly powerful, and I think it has a lot of potential. The one thing it currently doesn't have is Ephemeral Shroud. It needs some Ephemeral Shrouds, so I'm going to have to figure out something to cut for those, because I keep losing to not having them. But beyond that, I think this deck has a ton of potential. This whole idea of actually breaking Rite of the Undervault really excites me, and I think I think I've inadvertently come up with something that is much more powerful than I was expecting. So I'm very, very excited about this one. So I've obviously still been playing it, and it's still holding up. I've now gotten to Diamond, and it's still putting up decent win rates. I think the last quest I did with it, I went 3-1. You know, I'm definitely very happy with that. So yeah, I'm gonna keep tinkering with this one maybe trying different combos or different packages. You know, maybe I even want some kind of Darkfire sacrifice into mid-range or larger minions. It kind of depends on what comes out in Shimzar, to be honest. There are cards in there like the 1 mana make a Shadowkeep draw a card spell that could be quite interesting. And maybe fits into a deck like this. And maybe there's a sort of turbo creep deck now that Shadow Nova is going to become cheaper. It's getting cheaper, and creep squares will only deal 1 damage instead of however much damage, a number of damage equal to the number of creep squares on the board. So it might be possible that we can make a Cassava deck that's just going to flood out cards and then play lots of Rite of the Undervaults and draw more, and not have a hand that gets clunked up by these 7-cost cards that current Cassava decks running Rite do. So there's a lot of potential in Navician, I think, and both in this archetype and in the faction in general. Quite a lot's going to change. So I'm pretty excited to see where this idea of, you know, drawing 6 off Rite of the Undervault instead of 3 or 4, I'm very excited to see what that idea can take me. And finally, Sky High. Still love that name. So this was me trying to come up with something to do with Songhai that I hadn't already done during the rest of the series. And in searching my collection, I found Skywing and decided to build a flying deck. So obviously building around a concept isn't good enough if the concept doesn't actually have a plan, doesn't do anything. So we ended up making an aggressive deck that has some tempo elements, but mostly just wants to find good opportunities to push face. So we have Ancestral Divination as a way of keeping the gas in the tank and allowing our mostly small minions to occasionally die for no value, and that be not the worst thing ever. And it also means that when we're ahead, we're really ahead, because we can, you know, make a big board and still have the same number of cards in hand as the opponent, who hasn't played any of their stuff yet. So Ancestral Divination is kind of the second build around, and works really well with the fact that Skywing reduces the cost of cards, specifically cards with flying. The rest of the deck is, of course, we have our usual complement of 2-drops. I have the full 3 Blood Tier Alchemists because they go very well with Ancestral Divination. I even have a Moor as like a 4th one. We have some buff spells. We have Saberspine Seal. We have Inner Focus in order to do things like play a Wings of Paradise, give it haste, replace it, and attack something across the board out of nowhere for 5 damage. But mostly for the 1-more combo with Scarlet Viper, which still hasn't come up, which makes me sad. We have, yeah, the top end is just a couple of flyers, and again, these cards are like mediumly expensive, but part of the plan is to reduce their cost with Skywing, so hopefully we can play them on the cheap and still put something else down in the same turn. And there's a random looking 4 Winds Magi in there, who's just this utility piece for when you sit around with him in your hand and you're like, okay, I've got 2 spells in my hand now, let's play 4 Winds Magi and get an extra 2 damage in and heal for 2. It's pretty strong. The card just does a little bit of extra work. So I was very happy with how this deck turned out. I thought it was actually relatively strong, considering my expectations of it. As far as updating it goes, I think part of that is seeing whether they print any good flyers in the upcoming expansion. If they print another cheap flyer, this deck could actually get quite good. Skywing cost reduction is a very strong mechanic, and Skywing has quite a bit of potential, I think. The card itself is not obscenely powerful, and generally you won't be able to play it and a bunch of other stuff early on, but late in the game it can allow you to just splurge your hand, and sometimes you get 2 of them and silly things happen. If enough solid flying creatures are printed, we could see Skywing, I was going to say take off, but that seems like a poor choice of words, become popular, get good. Right now, there's not a whole lot in here that excites me with regards to this deck. There's the backstab elements don't really fit. There's Tuskboar. Tuskboar is quite good. It's just a cheap rush minion that your opponent can't really ignore, but will try to. There's Songhai Good Stuff staples Lantern Fox and Onyx Bear Seal, which are both strong cards. This is a solid removal spell, which permanently transmutes an enemy minion into a 0/2. And Lantern Fox is this awful thing for your opponent to try and play against, but is similarly awful for you when they have Zenrui. So the card is not at its best right now because Zenrui is quite popular, but it's still very, very, very strong, especially with Inner Focus. So probably putting some Lantern Foxes in wouldn't be a terrible idea. The deck doesn't really need more card draw because of the Ancestrals. They're quite good, but Lantern Fox is a nice way of gaining value that can be used as a draw engine when you need to. Like, you can replace the Phoenix Fires, or you can just try and get as many of them out as possible. Normally in practice you end up either just turning it directly into 2 Phoenix Fires, having it be silenced and removed after getting 1 Phoenix Fire out of it maybe, or more likely playing it and using Inner Focus and just basically turning your Inner Focus into 2 damage plus a Phoenix Fire. So it doesn't really draw you cards in the same way that Spelljammer does, but it can certainly help you get card advantage and get ahead. As far as what to cut for those, I'd probably look at cutting maybe a Phoenix Fire, Saberspine Seal, Twin Strike. I don't know about the 4 wins. When you're putting more spells in your deck, it gets slightly better, but I guess we're cutting spells for Lantern Foxes. Probably more as well. Can live with that more. Yeah. What else is there? That's kind of it, really. There's stuff like Spiral Technique if you want to be able to deal 8 to somebody. There's Hamon Bladeseeker, who doesn't have flying but is massive and aggressively costed. I really like this card. It's very, very good. This isn't really a Heaven's Eclipse deck. We're not relying on our spells very much, and we want to fill up our hand with minions predominantly. But given that we're not playing that much draw, Hamseeker could be a nice way to just be like, well, I'm only going to play 1 card a turn a decent amount of the time. Here's the biggest one I can find. But I wouldn't call it mandatory. So that's our 6 decks. And hopefully some useful thoughts on, where to go with them if you want to keep playing any of them. As usual, of course, feel free to ask me, and I will give you whatever further advice I can. I'm always happy to see, if people are interested in or playing these decks, or if they've inspired you to, keep in touch, let me know. So now, before I go, I just want to quickly look at some of my decks. I've got 7 here. Let's try and go through them quickly. I'm just going to give a brief overview of what the deck's overall plan is. Is it mid-range, combo, control, aggro? How I built it and why, and what sort of cards have made it in. So the first one, this is a Magmar deck that I built when I realized I owned 3 copies of Kujata and 3 copies of Flash Reincarnation, and some random 7-drop legendaries. And I was like, okay, let's build a deck that wants to play big stuff on the cheap, because it'll be very entertaining. And it is. It's very entertaining. So most of this deck is actually just Magmar good stuff. Kujata isn't seeing a lot of play right now, but Flash Reincarnation is because of Tagetes. So we have, 2 drops, removal, more 2 drops, Tigers. There's a bit more draw in this than average because Kujata isn't really a card. Like, either it dies for free or you play it miles away where it won't do anything. And all it does is reduce the cost of minions. That in itself can, of course, be powerful, but you do expend a lot of cards on the cost reduction in this deck. So I've put in 2 Spelljammers and 2 copies of Ulquiorra to make sure I don't run out of resources too easily. The mid-range is all pretty typical stuff. Tagetes is there. Sunsteel Defender is there. I really like this card in Magmar decks, and actually the meta in general seems to have picked up on it recently because people are playing Flash Reincarnation. This has Force Field, which absorbs the first amount of damage it takes every turn, and it regenerates every turn. So you Flash Reincarnation it, It takes 2, which the force field absorbs. You pass the turn and it gets the force field back. So you can play a 4/3 force field on the first turn. If your opponent doesn't have a natural selection or some other specific answer, they are in deep trouble. Of course, if they have the natural selection, you probably lose, but sometimes you got to risk it. So then I have a Plasma Storm, I have a Spirit Harvester, which could probably be a Blistering Scorn now. I have the Ubiquitous Mercantor, and then I have some basically silly bombs. This is just the 7-drop legendaries I have. Exune is hilarious with Flash Reincarnation because it's a big Sunsteel defender. It has Force Field. And it can draw a bunch of cards, so it fulfills that role as well. Pandora is great. Flashing this out gives you a 3/8 that immediately spawns a 3/3 with a good ability. This card is probably the best neutral 7-drop in the game, I think. Like, the absolute best one is probably Silithar Elder, but Pandora is not even that far behind. Actually, no, the best one's probably Spectral Revenant. The 6/6 with Rush that Abyssian have that deals 4 damage to your face when it hits one of your minions. That thing is nasty. But Pandora is just a lot of value. Her only real vulnerability is Plasma Storm, which can kill her and the 3/3 in one fell swoop. And then there's Red Singer. This card is a bit awkward. It's not that good, but I really like it. Every now and then, it comes down and kills something as big as it is for free, and that's absolutely insane. And your opponent really has to respect it. It is unfortunately very bad against Taegete, like most other large minions, but there you go. So that's that deck. It's not really an aggro deck. It's not really a mid-range deck. It's mostly just let's play some big minions. So I guess it's a ramp deck, which is like sort of combo-ish. But it can play a pretty good, aggressive, mid-rangey Magmar-y game plan because it has a lot of the staples in it. Next up is my Lionar deck. This is the first deck I built, and I've just been sort of gradually tweaking and improving it since. Because, you start with Lionar when you start playing. So, this deck is not that similar to the Golem deck. It's mostly just Lionar good stuff staples. It is very definitely a mid-range deck. So we have the usual 2-drops. We have Azurite Lion, we have Primus Fist, we have Windblade Adept. I've got an Ephemeral Shroud in there. I've got Lasting Judgment. I think this card is underrated. People don't play this enough, but when you're going second, you play your awesome 2-drop, you kill their 2-drop. You can use it to buff a high toughness minion to attack for more damage. You can use it, as +3 damage on a minion when you're trading with things. Just generally quite strong. I have a Magnetize as an antidote to Demonic Lure / Funny Trick. This card's taken off recently. I think people started playing it in Arcanist decks and then realized it was great. So Repulsor Beast basically has vanished from the meta nowadays because the faction you most want it against, Lionar, A, isn't that popular, and B, usually has Magnetize. This card can give you surprising bursts of reach. Like, you can move Arjun, cast Magnetize, and then move the minion, which is something like 5 or 6 squares of reach, which is like ridiculous. I have an Arclight Sentinel. I have a soft spot for this card. It's just a big maw, but it's good at that. And the +2 attack on a friendly minion comes up more than you think. I obviously have a Blistering Scorn, I have a pair of Scorns, Martyrdom, Silverguard Knight, Sojourner, Dualtast. This is basically a rerun of all the suggestions I made for the Golem deck. Holy Immolation. I got lucky, and I think this was the first epic I opened 3 copies of, and Mercantor Warbeast was the second epic I opened 3 copies of. And those are probably the first and second best cards in the game, except maybe Taegete now. So that was lucky. And the top end, I have Ironcliff Guardians, which are another Lionar staple. It's big, it has Provoke, it's good with Divine Bond, you can play it wherever you want, great card. I have a Scientist, who I threw in when it was released for testing purposes. Found it to be quite good. It's basically a 7-mana 8/6 that draws a card, because you just play it and play Arjun's Bloodborne spell on it immediately. So So it's really good for just giving you a little bit of extra gas late on and forcing your opponent to deal with this large minion. And then I have a Grandmaster's here, which is here because I opened it and I thought it would be funny. It's funny. It's not as good as it looks. The timing on it is a bit awkward. It's great if you can play it and then immediately trade your general into something, but that doesn't come up very often. So yeah, generally this deck just wants to like play large minions, stick them on the board, beat face. Usually I end up playing quite a tempo-y game plan because I have all these holy immolations. So, and things like Arclight Sentinel, which is quite a good tempo swinging card, as well as now Blistering Scorn. So I just want to get ahead and stay ahead by playing these powerful minions with good opening gambits or overly large stats, like the Windblade and the Dioltas, which is just a big pile of stats really when you think about the 0-10. And then, you know, constantly threatening Divine Bond with Dioltas, Ironcliffe Guardian, and then things like Dancing Blades, which is quite a good Divine Bond target. And it's comfortable in the late game thanks to having a bunch of large minions and the Scientist. So, you know, to draw extra cards, as well as the Sojourners. So, you know, if the game goes long, which it often does, I'm still okay with that. My top decks are great. I've got some draw. I've got good removal. I'm going to be fine. Next up is my beloved Songhai deck. So, this is the one I net decked. I decided at some point that I wanted to learn what at the time I called Spellhigh. It's not really the modern equivalent, the modern definition of Spellhigh, but it's close enough. So this is the backstabby, bursty combo deck. So we have Kaido Assassins, we have Gorehorns. I built this based on a so-called hybrid high list, which is like a mix between the very aggressive Spellhigh decks with just lots of burn and, at the time, backstab creatures, and a mid-range deck. So it has stuff like Kaido Assassin, but it also has a couple of Hamon Bladeseekers, which are just great for, you know, reliably beating face if the rest of your hand sucks or if your opponent's silencing all your stuff. A lot of this deck is very typical looking Songhai cards, but bringing them all together is the trick. So this is very, very much a combo deck. There's very little thought here to getting value off things. I even cut a Lantern Fox because they kept getting stolen by Zenri, and it was upsetting me. But he also just wasn't doing that much because often my hand was so full that I wasn't getting that much value off him because I run a bunch of card draw. I have Spelljammers, I have Elkyarns, I have a Heaven's Eclipse, and as well as the Lantern Foxes, themselves. And things like Mana Vortex, which helps me cycle through my deck, because I want to make sure I have a bunch of specific cards in hand. The staple combo is Gorehorn plus Inner Focus to allow it to attack this turn, plus, if necessary, Mist Dragon Seal to teleport it behind the opponent, plus Killing Edge. And if you don't quite have the mana, you have Mana Vortex. So, because I have so much draw, this combo comes up more than you might expect, and obviously I can replace carefully for it. And it deals, depending on exactly which cards I've drawn and put into it, somewhere between 8 and about 11 damage. Out of nowhere. And of course, if you do that twice, you win the game. You know, that's about 20 damage, and you have plenty of other incidental damage or your opponent attacking your minions. So, getting and sticking Gorehorns is sort of the plan A of the deck. Gorehorn is a ton better than Kaido Assassin, but Kaido Assassin is a decent replacement, if needs be. I'm very much looking forward to the 1-drop Katara, which is from Shimzar, which is a 1/3 for 1 with Backstab 3. I think that's really powerful. And it's basically just better than Kaido Assassin. You know, if Kaido Assassin being a 2/3 comes up, your opponent's attacking it during your turn most likely, and you're in bad shape. This deck really doesn't want to do that. You know, we have Lantern Foxes for minion on minion combat. Generally, we just want to stab them in the back with 9/7s and hope they can't kill them. I played Chakri Avatar as well, of course. This deck has a very high density of spells. I'm personally not a big fan of Chakri Avatar because he's very hit and miss. You know, if you sink everything into a Chakri and they don't have a Dispel, you might win. But if they do have a Dispel, you probably lose. Fortunately, you know, if my hand has an Ulquion in it, maybe I can splurge a bit and make a 6-7 Chakri and just see if they have an answer, because I can reload with Ulquion the next time. And of course we have Four Winds Mega, who is absolutely invaluable in this deck. Keeps you alive against other aggro decks, swings races, kills artifacts, adds extra damage to everything you do. Great. So I really like this deck. It's kind of my beloved pet deck, and I've been, you know, learning and tweaking and trying new things over time. I built a budget version of it initially. It's now pretty close to unrestricted. I think I don't own a third juxtaposition, but I don't know if I'd want to run a third juxtaposition. Other than that, I think I'm okay, unless I decide to run a second Heaven's Eclipse at some point, which I don't own, but I can just play an Elkion for that. I'm okay for card draw right now. Yeah, I really enjoy this deck. I've sort of... I made S rank with it. I used it to push through rank 1 a couple of seasons ago when I made S rank. I sort of soured on it slightly when the meta became full of Taigetes, but I now own enough Onyx Bear Seals that maybe I can deal with her. So might be time to bust out the old burst combo again. What's next? We have my Creep Cassiva control deck. This is the deck that I would have built if they hadn't announced the Creep rework. So this is obviously built around Shadow Nova, which makes increasingly powerful 2x2 areas of damage, and Cassiva's Bloodborne spell, which can kill things and turn them into Shadow Creep. This is a kind of a mid-rangey build, so no Right to the Undervault, not that much card draw, no things like Void Pulse, you know, these kind of cheap effects. I do have Grasp of Agony. 2 Grasp of Agony, probably too much. Thinking about it now, I should probably cut one of those. But there are, you know, there's a decent number of early drops, but it's mostly a bare minimum, just kind of stuff that will occasionally come in handy, like Healing Mystic, Rustcrawler, and just allow me to play something on turn 1 when I'm going first. I have a good collection of mid-range minions. I have a little bit of card draw. I have Sojourners, I have an Ulquion. I have Kileno to gain life, as well as a Shadow Dancer. There's a decent one-off, even in a deck that isn't a Swarm deck, because you spend a lot of time killing your opponent's minions with this deck because it's a control deck. The whole point is just to survive until you can get to Shadow Nova, or overwhelm your opponent with card advantage and just have a big massive board of things like random Dioltesses and Dancing Blades and other various bits and pieces. To that end, I have a Pandora as kind of a backup win condition. I don't own Spectral Revenants, which are the typical other 7-drop legendary in other 7-drop in Creep Abyssian decks, but I'm kind of happy with my Pandora as backup win con and just Shadow Novas to do the damage. I'm playing Bone Reapers. I don't know if this card is good right now. It is very vulnerable to Zenri, but the area of effect it makes is surprisingly strong, and locking people down with 9 toughness worth of Provoke is great. This deck can make very scary use of Provoke, because if you can catch your opponent on a creep square or play a Shadow Nova underneath them while they're standing next to a Provoke, they just lose over the course of a few turns. And I once locked someone out by putting a 0-10 from Dioltest next to them, playing Shadow Nova, and then using Breath of the Unborn to heal the 0-10 after my opponent had mostly killed it. And she was just stuck there for like 4 turns and died. It was great. So yeah, this deck it's quite a lot of fun. I do enjoy playing Creep. The mirrors are hilarious because it's all about, basically the first person to play Shadow Nova usually loses, because you can overwrite each other's Novas. So a lot of it is this kind of jostling of trying to get maximum value off of your Novas while also erasing as much of their creep as possible. It's really entertaining and very difficult, very intense. Yeah, this deck has served me pretty well. It's probably a little outdated now. Maybe there's some card choices that need to be revised, but generally it performs pretty well. Then we have my sort of air quotes proper Vanar deck. This is the deck that I based the All Your Basics one off. This is a pretty similar list. It's a bit outdated now. It obviously has some higher rarity cards. It has this playset of Merc-Blood Devourers I randomly opened. Thought would be fun. They are. I have a Hearth Sister, which I elected not to include in the other list. Maybe that was an error, I'm not sure. The card is quite good. There's a lot of little tricks you can do with it. I think this deck was built back in the day when Xerix had a Bloodborne spell that made the Rush Dervishes that the Obelisks make, so the ones that it's a 2/2 with Rush that dissipates at end of turn. It was very, very powerful. And there was a lot of aggression in the meta between that and Fae and Songhai. So I have 2 Emerald Rejuvenators and a kind of an emphasis on provoke minions with this full set of Primus Shieldmaster plus 2 Dioltas, just to stay alive against these aggressive decks and try and beat them with big minions on the board. As with most Kara lists, I don't have much of a top end. I just have a couple of 5-drops that have strong effects and are even stronger when you've buffed them. I did once play a 7/6 Sunset Paragon that killed my opponent's 5/5. That was pretty sweet. And I have the 1 Zenri I own because he is gross. There's a few experimental slots in here. Maya is quite good with Snow Chaser, and I just kind of wanted to see if she was good. Generally, she's just a big pile of stats, and Kara likes that. Wolfraven, likewise, this card is surprisingly powerful. Sometimes it's just useless, but the ability to just play a 5/5 or 6/6 flyer for 3 is absolutely bananas. This card can be quite strong. I built a Sarge deck, so I kind of wanted to see if Sarge would work. This was hence the question mark in the title. This is very much an experimental list. So I don't own the weird legendaries that you need to make the sort of combo Sarge deck where you play a couple of artifacts on her, and then you play Aurora's Tears to give her +2 attack for each artifact, and then Time Maelstrom to take an extra turn essentially with Sarge. So she gets to like 9 attack or something and attacks twice, and your opponent dies. I don't own those cards, but I do own some Staffs, which is the basic one that everyone has, and Wildfire Rank, which is the important one for playing a controlling Sarge playstyle, which gives her Blast, allowing her to attack from a distance. So this is, again, another control deck. It's sort of a bit mid-rangey, like the Cassiva one is. I have the Dioltas, I have Emerald Rejuvenator, but this one has a little more top end. I have Starfire Scarabs, I have Dominate Will, this card is great. I have the full set of 3 Ulquions, as well as a Spelljammer just to help me find my artifacts and ensure, it doesn't matter if I'm drawing my opponent cards if I have an active Wildfire Rank, because I just kill everything they play without retaliation in theory. So a one-off Spelljammer is reasonable. And the rest of the deck is, as usual, just support for that. We have some 2-drops. We have Scion's First Wish, which can, swing some combat maths or help you get ahead early on. Dig for cards. We have the ever invaluable Siphon Energy. Also good with Spelljammer and Ulquion, when you have lots of card draw in your deck, it's kind of sometimes useful to just be able to splurge a bit. So I have Sand Sister Saon, who was actually the reason I built this deck. When she came out, I wondered if Sarge could be good now. And Saon really does bring a lot. She's, like an artifact that can't be destroyed by just hitting Sarge, which, since Sarge has to hit things in order to kill them with her Bloodborne spell, it's reasonably powerful. If you don't have Wildfire Rank, Saon provides another way of, air quotes, permanently buffing Sarge if you can keep Saon herself protected. It is nice that Saon plus Bloodborne spell on turn 3 allows you to kill a toughness 6 minion, which includes basically every 4-drop and cheaper. Sarge can kill essentially anything your opponent will have played up to that point with just Saon plus her Bloodborne spell activation. So that's kind of reasonably strong, and I've been impressed with Saon. I quite like her. Generally, this deck is just a pile of jank, but it got a little, it performed a little better than I was expecting. And it was an unusual experiment to build. It was the sort of thing where it's like, well, Saon looks interesting. She's just come out. I want to try her out. oh, I've opened 3 wildfire ranks. Okay, let's try this. And I had some pretty interesting games with it. It takes a very long time to win with this deck in a lot of games. I had some really grindy games against like Heal Lionar and things, but it does win those grindy games eventually. You know, once you get a wildfire rank down, you know, you will eventually get to the point where you're just killing your opponent's top decks every turn, and they can't really beat that because eventually you'll just be snowballing the board with 4/4s that you randomly draw, and eventually winning. You know, so that kind of, it's not a control deck with a massive amount of inevitability. So inevitability is the idea that if the game goes on for an infinite length of time, you'll win. Which Kasava is really good for, because Shadow Nova gives a lot of inevitability. You know, the 3rd Shadow Nova is going to deal like 12, 15 damage. And in the meantime, you can get a lot of value off of killing your opponent's stuff, massively limit their movement, or deal, you know, damage to their face if they're bunched up with their minions. And generally just put your opponent under a lot of pressure where they have to constantly respect the fact that you might draw another Nova. This deck doesn't really have that. You know, we have 1 or 2 very strong late game cards, but that's about it. And those cards are beatable if the opponent is far enough ahead. So this deck would probably lose to Kasava given enough time, although I found that in practice you can beat Kasava with Wildfire Rank. You know, when she relies on blocking off space with Shadow Creep so much, where you can just kind of strafe around the other side of the Shadow Creep and shoot at her with Blast. That kind of takes a lot of the wind out of Kasava's sails. So, you know, in that particular matchup it's not so bad. But we don't have anywhere near as much inevitability against a generic opponent as that Kasava deck would. You know, we're playing a lot of 4/4s and some artifacts that can generate a bunch of advantage, essentially. If the artifacts are answered, we don't have that much. But it's fun to play that sort of control deck sometimes, where you're just kind of hoping to pull out your nonsense and then maybe you'll win. And, you know, Sarge is very unusual. You know, playing with Wildfire Rank is an experience you don't get elsewhere. So, you know, I definitely recommend giving this a try if you have enough random expensive cards to go off with her. I think that about wraps it up. Oh no, there's one left. So, speaking of budget decks, this is one of my decks from the Newlist Duelist tournament that I keep around just basically for sentimental value. So, I entered the first Newlist tournament, which is a tournament for new players. You have to have fewer than 200 ranked wins, and your deck can only include basics, commons, and rares. But you have to stick with the same faction, but you can change your deck arbitrarily between games in a single match. So what I did was I started out playing Mech Vitruvian, which was great at the time because Xerx's Bloodborne spell was powerful. So I started out with this aggressive deck that had the Mechazor stuff in it. And then in game 2, I would get rid of all of that and play this control deck instead. So this is a late game deck. It has healing, it has more Dispel, it has hard removal, it normally had Dominate Will. This is presumably the version I played tuned to beat whatever my last opponent was playing. Because the advantage of, you know, control decks, they have to have a bunch of specific answers in. They aren't always good, and you want to be as resilient as possible to your opponent's answers. In the case of this deck, I could tune the deck before I brought it to battle, essentially, based on what my opponent was playing. So, for instance, when they were playing Lionar, I'd run 2 Dominate Will instead of 1. I think my last opponent was playing Vitruvian themselves, like an aggro deck. So, against aggro, Dominate Will is rubbish because it's 7 mana and doesn't do anything. But against slow decks with lots of big minions, Dominate Will is amazing. Yeah, I must have made something aggressive because I was playing the full set of Emerald Rejuvenator. So it's kind of very interesting to see see how well it worked. My game 1 deck didn't have any obelisks in as well, so my opponents wouldn't bring in answers to them. It wouldn't load up on Dispel or Polarity or whatever. They could kill these obelisks. So I also got a bunch of advantage off of those coming in game 2. And again, this was kind of back in the day when Xerx's Bloodborne spell was more powerful than it is now, so you could get more mileage out of that. And the Fireblaze Obelisk basically made his BBS into a Saberspine target, which was very, very strong. So this deck, I can't really recommend for playing on the ladder right now, but it is stronger than it looks. It looks like a pile, and it mostly is a pile, but I was very impressed with how well it did, especially as I was able to tune it each time. So I have a lot of fond memories of that. I came 7th out of 79 in the tournament, I think, if I recall correctly. I was really happy with that. So, those are my decks. I hope you enjoyed that sort of brief little look into the world beyond the 6 we built in the series. As before, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions about deck building, if you want some advice, if you want to know what I think about tweaks to my lists or lists you've come up with yourself. I'm always happy to chat. I'm on Discord, I'm on Reddit, I'm in game, same name everywhere, Son of Makuta. So yeah, don't hesitate to give me a shout. As to the series itself, No List to Do List, so this wraps up Series 1, which I'm quite proud of. I am not sure when there will be a Series 2, or possibly if, but I assume so. I like the idea of doing this again at some point. I don't really want to commit to anything at this point because I don't know what my plans are going to be, and I need to make sure I have ideas, but I am probably going to take a little bit of a break from making videos for a month or so, and then maybe I don't know, come up with something, do something Gauntlet related. I'll get the itch, I really enjoy doing this, so I'll definitely make some new content fairly soon. Again, if you have requests or ideas, let me know. Like, I'll happily think about making whatever people want to see and hear from me. So keep in touch. Don't be a stranger. Thank you very much for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed. I hope the series has been educational and interesting and entertaining. And I really appreciate your attention and support and feedback. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.